Dr. Smizer.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. Our intention together was to just give me a chance to talk to you about what's been happening, what work is happening in preparation for start times, and then turn it over to you. There's no staff presentation other than the comments that I'm going to make. So first, I just want to thank you for making the decision to do this as early as you did in the school year, because we have a lot of work to do. We are involved in a lot of work. It's proceeding well, but there are many plans and changes to be made, and a lot of staff are working very hard to make it all happen in time. So we really appreciate that. We are hopeful that we will be able to do a lot of problem solving ahead of time before the problems happen. I'm sure we won't be able to solve them all. Some other districts have done it quite close to the start of the school year, have had a lot more problem solving to do after school starts, and we really appreciate the heads up. Schools are I have 5 areas that we're working on. We're actually working on probably more, but I wanted to give you some comments on 5 different areas. First, on academic schedules, so the school day itself. Schools are adjusting their bell schedules during the day to accommodate the start and end times. And they are really exploring a lot of different creative scheduling, particularly to deal with athletic periods and electives, and I will mention that in a moment. So the schools are hard at work working on that process collectively, the way they do their work in the buildings. Transportation is developing all of the new routes to accommodate the start times, and they anticipate finalizing the routing in August, which is about the same time of year they normally have the routes available. We would love to be able to have that sooner, but it's just not possible. One of the things that happens every year is that during the summer people move in, and if they need busing, often we end up changing the bus route from what it was earlier, then it ends up changing right at the last minute, and that's why the bus routes have to be not told to families, the actual bus stop times, until August. It's possible we're shooting for early August, but we recognize that that is still pretty close up to the start of the school year. If there's any way we can get some information out, maybe even range of times to families to help them plan, we will do that. But at this point in time, we're not making that promise, so we'll see how that goes. Athletics has a lot of complications. I would say that of all of the questions we've received, they seem to be focused on athletics. We anticipate by April 1st to have a pretty good idea of what the practice schedules would look like for most sports, but they will likely be adjusted throughout the school year, particularly the different seasons as the school year progresses. We're doing our best to avoid moving practices to the morning, for high school particularly, with the exception of swimming and hockey, which already have early morning times, and they'll have to stay there. For indoor sports, we anticipate practice windows to be roughly 4:30 to 9. For outdoor sports, it would be more 4:30 to sundown. So it depends on which season you are, whether you can play all the way till 9 or not. We are having challenges finding space for football and soccer, particularly to practice outdoors in the fall because of daylight, and also long playing seasons, so that season is long. So we are looking into some options. We're exploring the possibility of using some City of Fort Collins field space that has lights, if that's possible. We're talking to them about that, and we're also exploring the possibility of using portable lights at some of our fields. So the shortest days of the year, that's the biggest issue we're facing at the moment with athletics. Game schedules at the high school level will continue to be set for the most part by not us, by the Front Range League, as they always have done. So we will have little control over game times. It is possible that some athletics and some sports will miss more class time. And we'll do our best to negotiate that if we can, but we are not the decision makers. I think that's a common thing that we've seen happen in other districts that have gone to a later start. Extracurriculars in general, all of the schools are working hard to adjust their extracurricular schedules, and those are being figured out and finalized at each school as they're working through the logistics. And then childcare has been a big question. We are in close communication with Base Camp about adjusting their offerings for the 10 elementary schools that will start at 7:45. Base Camp we anticipate will be sharing their new pricing structures and schedules with the principals in February. So they are working fast and hard to adjust their plans for next year to provide more options for parents. And so we will hear what they come up with. Keep in mind that we are not Base Camp. They're often in our buildings, but that's not an actual district function, but they have been working very closely with Dr. Lambert and our principals to work those things out. It'll likely be different at different locations. So we will continue to work on all of the logistical issues throughout the summer, and we plan to come back and give you a more formal update to the board, an agendized topic in April. So we'll give you where we are at that point, where we're still struggling, what we've already figured out. Anything that a parent has a question or a staff member about activities, athletics, course schedules, course offerings, we're recommending that parents start by speaking to the principal of their child's school, because most of those decisions are being handled at the school level. They're wrestling with their own offerings, their clubs, their extracurriculars, and how are they going to offer those and when and where throughout the year. So those are very individualized decisions. We are not, as a district office, making those decisions for principals. They're figuring it out with their communities. So that is all I have as a brief update, and stay tuned for April. We'll try to bring you more. If you have more specific questions that you feel like you need answered between now and April, our intention was to take those questions and just send you back by email or a Friday update, especially if it's something we can easily answer.
Okay, thank you for those comments and kind of putting out in public the work that's going on. And there have been questions from board members. Are there some questions or discussion that board members would like to make tonight, Nate?
Yeah, I have a few, and start at least by asking the question about school schedules, and if you can just give us the nickel tour of, sounds like high schools are well underway, and I wondered about other levels, what the process is for determining schedules, if you can just tell us.
I think it's a pretty easy shift for our middle schools, because the majority of them moved 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And so for them it was pick the day up and move it 20 minutes, and everything else stayed roughly the same. One of the conversations that middle schools are having is what to do with staff meeting times. They have the possibility of doing some of the meeting times before school rather than after school, thus allowing the staff members to be done with their school day earlier in the day. So that's a conversation that's going on in several of our middle schools. But in terms of the actual academic day, they just picked it up and moved it forward. It looks like athletics for the middle schools will be able to stay virtually the same as it has been. So that's our middle school. It's been relatively easy. Our high schools, particularly our 4 comprehensives, have been in a process of working with their staff, trying to figure out what makes the most sense. Fossil Ridge was early out of the gate in terms of looking at how do they continue with their 7-period day, but also how do they look at what they could do to support the early out for athletics. They've landed on a schedule that I think they like, which allows them to have their advisory program moved to the end of the day on, I believe it's on Tuesdays, and they'll have what they call an extended learning opportunity on Thursday afternoons, and that keeps the 7-period day that Fossil Ridge has grown accustomed to intact. Also allows for the Tuesday, Thursday early out for games to be less impactful than it would have been had those been regular courses at the end of the day and the advisory period early in the day, which is the way it sits now. So that's them looking at a way to soften the early out. Rocky is looking at moving their block a little later in the day, extending each of their periods slightly as we create 5 days that are the same versus the 4 plus the late start day now. So they made some tweaks to theirs. Fort Collins High School, given their 8-period day where they have more transitions, has actually asked us to extend their day. I think they're extending their day by 8 minutes so they can meet the state requirements. With that, their schedule looks like it's going to stay virtually the same as it is now, you know, with the 4 or 5 equivalent days, as opposed to the 2 late start days that Fort Collins lives with now. And Poudre is still doing the work. They've got a few schedules that they're looking at and still trying to gain consensus with their staff around what direction they'll go. But each of the schools have been working diligently to try to get something that makes sense in their community. High schools also are looking at how's the meeting time work for their staff as well, and the potential for their collaborative time to be before school is also, I mean, it's even easier for the high schools than it is for the middle schools because they don't start each day till 9 o'clock. In terms of some of the other alternative schools, working with a school like Centennial, given its clientele and what its work looked like, looking at transportation that would potentially run to Centennial, also including the Front Range transportation and possibly the Futures Lab, and allowing Centennial to keep an 8 o'clock start, which allows that school to let those students leave school to work. Also allows us to keep transportation going for all those kind of independent schools. With PCA moving its schedule back, PGA moving its schedule back, and continue to look at how do we transport kids. And so each of the schools is engaged in how to make that all come together. But they're all doing it in a way that is thoughtful, and I've been impressed with how they've worked together to try to figure out what works best for their community and the constraints they've been given.
If I could add a comment, I also want to say that we're doing all this planning and problem solving for year 1, and we absolutely will be watching year 1 to see if we can do even better in year 2. So I just want families and parents to know that we'll continue to problem solve along the way and try to make it better in its second year.
So, Dr. Lambert, how about elementary? What's the process?
Yeah, it's a little different because the elementary day is controlled typically at a grade level. People set their reading and math time, so you don't have a school schedule kind of hinging on a bell. What we've done so far, we've had 2 meetings since the decision has been made where we brought the same start time school principals together to share some of the commonalities that they have, particularly that group that's going early. It's different for them. We've put them together to problem solve just a little bit about how they're doing the meeting times like Scott's talking about and some of the issues that go with that start. But essentially they're just adjusting their typical day accordingly and then working from there. The big challenges they have in front of them right now are to set their lunch times. That's going to be an issue because they want to coordinate with Craig Schneider and Child Nutrition and make sure all those plans kind of roll the right way. And then the other one, as Dr. Smizer alluded to, on February 5th at our shared meeting, Seth Kelly, who's the director of Base Camp, that's a big issue on the minds of our elementary parents. That's a lot of our families are served very well by Base Camp. Seth's going to come to the principals meeting and we're going to work through the day almost like a worksheet, which every school will be prepared with. Base Camp opens at, and then working through the day, when's the first bell, when adults supervise on the playground, when is lunch. And our goal will be that by the end of the day on February 5th, we'll be pretty squared away at each of our elementary schools and kind of be pre-positioned to communicate with our families within probably about 10 to 15 days after that. I think the challenge we're going to have at elementary are going to be the parents' concerns about bus routes, but the reality of it is we don't deliver those in a typical year until August. And I know because they're different this year, there's going to be a little more anxiety probably about when those times are. And I would say, and I know Pete will vouch for this, Matt and those guys are well aware of that on the routing and paying close attention. They're going to get those out as early as they can. But I think we have less challenges maybe than Scott's group does because we have control of our day once we know what the bell times are.
And I just realized I might be morphing into Rob now, since Rob is vice president. You mentioned teacher meeting times and collaboration, and that's going to be something for negotiations, isn't it? And the other sub part of that question is, may some of these ideas that each of, in that case, the comprehensive high schools are wrestling with, when to do it and how to do it, they can bring their thoughts to negotiation as well, right? I mean, don't we have to figure out how we're going to allow time for collaboration so that we, and this is a personal pet peeve of mine, so we don't do the dumb thing of having later secondary start times and also a later start Wednesday?
There's a lot of questions in there, Nate.
Yeah, if we could have Vicki address first the negotiations, because we only negotiate something if it's contract language and contract related, and it certainly is in the air, and it was in our circle. I mean, we all know that it's happening, so would you address to what degree this affects negotiation?
Well, right now we're waiting to get the schedules from the high schools, so we don't really have those yet. They're working on them, and so obviously if there's anything that we need to discuss during negotiations based upon those schedules, we'll talk about it then, but it's really premature at this point.
Nate, I think the other question I heard embedded in the questions was about a late start on one of the days, particularly like we have now at the high school, and the answer is no. We won't be having a 10:30 start instead of a 9 o'clock start. The reality is we have a late start 5 days a week for high schools, and I think one of the interesting things in the decision that you made that has happened is, from an equity standpoint, we have all of our students who can access the late start 5 days a week, where today, if you go to any of our high schools, those that have to take the bus show up at 7:30 in the morning at a typical high school. Those that don't have the bus right now have the luxury of the late start. And so all of our students will be able to come in late 5 days a week to high school. And it does open up, when you start thinking about the contract day, the conversations about where do teachers meet. Right now at some of our middle schools, they meet once a month after school, because the school day starts at 7:45. It's hard to have a meeting with teachers ahead of that. When you meet at 8:10 or 8:15, like Kennard does right now, their meetings are before school, and their teachers then have the ability to leave shortly after the students leave. So their day is over when the students, you're doing your training, your conversations with staff when your teachers are fresh, as opposed at the end of a day when your teachers are not fresh. And then the teachers are able to do their work when. It'd be nice to get to a place where the conversations, the collaboration, the pieces that make us better as a group are able to happen, and then allow for teacher planning time to be open and interpreted that way during the school day. So we're interrupting those less than potentially we are right now, as we're looking to have teams work together. Kennard, for example, has figured out how to do that before school. So those are conversations happening in the buildings right now. As we continue to think about we're better together, we have an avenue to rethink how we use time. And so those are part of the conversations with staffs in buildings right now.
Other questions or comments from board members? Kristen?
I just want to follow up with what you had said, Sandra, about keeping an eye on it in the following years. And just so I think just for parents out there who are concerned that we are keeping an eye on the 7:45 start times for elementary schools, and that if we are, seeing that's detrimental, that to reevaluate. And I just want to get confirmation on that.
I'm not sure that I can confirm that, absent millions of dollars for buses. So unfortunately, that is why those start times are where they are, is the complication of using the bus fleet that we have. If that turns out to be a big problem for a lot of places, the issue is that, we have a school who starts at that time now.
Right.
So an elementary.
No,
Um,
Stone.
Yeah, I was talking about problem solving within the context of the best we can do. And that's always going to be what we'll try to do, is the best we can do with the resources we have. So.
Okay, thanks.
Rob?
So I felt like there were two things inherent in what you asked, Kristen. One of them is, if we find there's a problem, what are we going to do about it? And I think you addressed that pretty clearly. I think the other question is, are we anticipating, for lack of a better word, tracking the effects of all of these changes on our students, and is that kind of analysis likely to be done over time to see what the trends are? Are we going to have the positive effects that we hope to have, for example, on the high school kids, and are there any other effects? So that kind of analysis is going to be done.
Yes, actually, we had a conversation about that, just you and I, recently.
I know, but I wanted to make it public.
I will say that as part of basically as part of DE 1.0, we analyze student achievement in all different ways, and certainly we will look at the student achievement and wellness of kids, like connection survey data and that kind of thing, and see if we think it had anything to do with changing start times. But I think that it will. There are so many changing variables that I doubt that we're going to find much. But we certainly are going to keep an eye on it and track it. And it's unusual, actually, to have, as we look at student data over time, to have an event like this large change that so clearly marks time. And so it does give us a spot in time to look and compare before and after, if you will. And so we will be doing that.
Great.
Whether or not we would be able to attribute some change in a student population's data to that event alone is kind of unlikely, but we will be looking.
Okay, and I'm sure that there are, just as Cherry Creek is using the resources, if you want to look at it that way, of a researcher, I'm sure there are public health folks in the community and who might be willing to help or talk to you about that if that's of value. So just something to keep in mind.
And I might jump in and say it a little differently, just to address a little bit what you were saying, Kristen and Rob. I think this was a momentous decision that the board made, and it's one that the board remains committed to today. The board of 5 that we are today remains committed to the change and is asking our staff to do the hard work. It would take board action down the road, I think, for us to alter the course because it involves large dollar amounts and big systemic changes. And I wonder if that's one way for us to communicate to ourselves and to staff and to the community how this sits today, is that we made a big decision. We're going to implement it today as within the parameters that were laid out by the board, and then it'll be monitored, and anything that would be different from that would probably take board action, maybe recommendations from staff, based on a collapse in data or whatnot. But I also think it merits to be said that there was a committee involved that helped us set these times. Staff reflected on them, and so far we think they're good and healthy for kids, and we've done the best we can possibly do for the population of students we have today. So I throw that out there and open up to any other comments. Yeah,
And I absolutely agree with it. And I'm sorry, I think my question didn't come out quite right, because I think what I am asking is just, are we going to be evaluating? And if we were to see some seismic shift If we were to look and see that all schools who are now, starting at 7:45 a.m., had a 10% drop in whatever, and again, it would be a board decision then to reevaluate, as it was a board decision to evaluate start times now. So no, my apologies, that was not asked correctly. And I do want to say that I am 100% still behind this decision that we have made, and I think it's going to be an excellent one, and thank you all for the work that you've been putting into it, because I know it's been tremendous work that you've been doing. So
You're welcome.
yeah.
On behalf of all the staff who are doing the work, you're welcome. And yeah, thanks for the clarification. And I want to assure you that if we saw the bottom falling out of something, we would not wait till DE 1.0 to come tell you about
And
it.
so my apologies, that the question wasn't asked well, so I apologize, yeah, that is what I was asking, so thank you.
Okay, Rob?
So just a clarification on something you said. You said we had a committee, and you mentioned staff and the like. We also had parents on that committee, right? So I wanted to, obviously not all parents, but representative parents, we hope, and the base camp person as well. So there was involvement at that level. I did have one question that I wanted to ask in particular, and it's for Dr. Lambert over here. And that is, we've heard concerns tonight, and we've certainly heard some concerns in email about the start time for some of these elementary schools. And I guess I would ask, what's your professional opinion on the effects of the change on the mental health and academic success of the elementary kids, particularly those who are going to have to start at 7:45, if you will, going next year? What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I think that when we did our committee work and we started looking at those times, we did have as Dr. Smizer mentioned, we do have a school that already starts at that time, and we had a teacher from that staff on our committee. And so a lot of times as questions would come up, we talk, how does that impact a school that starts so early? When do you do this? How do you do that? And, it's all that they know. And I think to speak directly to your question, we certainly wouldn't put anything out there that we thought was going to damage the success or the growth of opportunities as a school as a whole, the district as a whole, or any individual child. We certainly wouldn't want to put them in a bad situation. We thought long and hard about that. I think that we feel comfortable that the strong things we're doing at our elementary schools are not going to be hampered by a start time. It's still about how the adults in the building take care of the kids. And whether that's a 7:45 or whether that's an 8:30 or whatever the times are, and they're different across the district at the elementary schools, we feel strongly we'll take great care of the social and emotional learning that takes place, as well as the academic growth and achievement we're trying to get. There are some adjustments to make. It'd be silly to sit here and think that it's smooth sailing on every bit. There's some hard work to do. We're wrestling, families are wrestling with starting times, things like that in the morning, because their schedule has changed. And so one of the things we're paying close attention to that's probably worth mentioning, as Dr. Smizer said, we're working closely with Seth Kelly and Base Camp. They're an integral part of our success in this district. A lot of our families are served by that organization. So we've thought a lot about a school where Base Camp before the day was a little more split. They might do a couple of hours before school or so, 90 minutes, and maybe a couple after. Well, those proportions have changed. Now they may not even be there at the beginning of the day, but may be in Base Camp in those buildings at potentially up to 3 hours in the afternoon. So we're starting to talk a lot about what that afternoon looks like with Seth, and being creative and innovative in the partnerships to extend that academic day in a way. We think Base Camp does a good job with our kids, and the kids are like the adults. They work all day. We don't expect them to keep working. We like to relax too, so there's a part of that. But at the same time, 3 hours of that time we can capture. We're trying to do some things to help with our family dynamics, knowing that early start in the day is that way. Our hope is that our kids in those buildings that are staying in Base Camp and in other activities will have a chance to get a lot of those things done during that time with capable, skilled adults that know them and care for them to take advantage of that, and that'll free that time up in the evening. We're really not just thinking about the academic piece of the day. We're very cognizant of what family dynamics are, because our teachers are in those families. They have kids in our schools. They are asking about these very same questions that any family would have, and so they're a good barometer for us as we make our adjustments.
Okay, and I think it is worth acknowledging that the elementary school start time has been a concern for many parents, but staff saying it's healthy, and we also know that it's an adjustment for families as part of. I think that's a lot of what we're hearing too. So But it is a decision that we're going to have to ask parents to go through with. So Nate, did you have another comment?
I did a couple things. One is, yes, acknowledging the high anxiety among many elementary parents is important, and so I appreciate the answer, Dr. Lambert. And just a personal note, our kids went to base camp, and it was an excellent program, and I'm really glad that they're here because they did a great job. My question that I raised in our retreat in December was, given the concern among the elementary parents about some schools that started at 9 or so having shifted an hour and a quarter to 7:45, what was the chances of, is there any possibility of going from 7:45 to 8 or what? And my understanding, based on my inquiries, was not only the capital cost of the buses, but I think that we'd also talked in some of these scenarios about growth in the district generally and what that means for hiring additional bus drivers. And I thought if going from 7:45 to 8 o'clock meant a small handful of additional drivers, maybe that was achievable. But it's my understanding that it's in the teens of additional drivers. And so both the challenges of even hiring that many more people, not to mention the increased costs, is just not feasible. And I think the committee, it was my understanding the committee talked about possibly 7:30, and through working on the scenarios, the earliest start time was then shifted to 7:45. So that's kind of a limiting factor practically. So
Any comments? I'm seeing nods that Nate's stating it well, right? So, okay. Anything else, board members, would like to add, make public? Rob?
Yeah, I just have one other question based on your comments, Dr. Smizer, and that is, you'd mentioned that we don't have control over the game times, and I recognize I recognize the truth of that. My sense, though, is two things. My sense is, as other districts are also going to later start times, like Thompson, like Cherry Creek, like some of those, that the opportunity to have those start times be different and therefore have students miss less school than they otherwise would, that opportunity will increase to limit that. And yeah, in theory, and my sense also is that while no single district has can dictate the answer to that question, my understanding is that sometimes negotiations between the schools who are playing can also affect that result. At least that's what I understand from what other districts who have done this have happened.
Rob, I guess I'd answer it by saying it's possible.
Okay.
I think those things are possible. I think one of the things that I've cautioned our ADs about, even in year one, and I would caution us as a group here also,
That's fair.
is we'll learn a great deal in year one. And we could solve problems that aren't problems, or attempt to solve problems that aren't problems and create problems. Or we can learn as we're going through it, and that's what we're attempting to do with what Dr. Smizer said in terms of early morning practices. It's an easy solution to say we'll just move everything to the morning,
No.
but we're potentially solving a problem we don't even necessarily know we have. So we got to get through year one and learn. I think game times will be a good example of that. We've got to understand what's going on there. How much flexibility do we have? There clearly are game times right now in year one we don't have any control over. Is it possible that as more districts make the move that when those times are decided on by CHSA, that will be taken into consideration? It certainly is possible, and something we'll engage in as we move forward, as I believe Cherry Creek is engaged in.
Right. And it's that engagement, it's a statement of that engagement that I'm really looking for, so
Yeah.
that's cool. Thank you.
And I would just like to emphasize that the year is going to take a whole year. Because each season, particularly athletics, but also some extracurriculars only happen in the spring. So they won't even do it for the first time until maybe May, right? So it will be a whole year of learning, and we'll keep at it.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the work that's going to go into making that happen, so thank you all.
Nate?
I just wanted to round out one of the things about that Dr. Smizer talked about lighting fields, and I know that was one of the items that we discussed about the potential increased capital costs of lighting more fields, and there was some talk about whether more neighbors of the fields would freak out because those fields are lighted. And there are many downsides to talking to vendors at these conferences, but I did spend a lot of time talking to a particular lighting vendor at the annual conference of the Colorado Association of School Boards in December. And they had a display, but they also about how the new generation of LED lights is so focused on the field that there isn't a lot of bleed. And they referred me to, they put in the lights at the new CSU football stadium. Well, stadium, it's not just for football. But that was a major concern of the neighbors, especially to the south. And I noticed that when you are at a game at night, to the north of the stadium, there's a ram walk, and it's darker than anything you can ever imagine 300 feet away from the stadium, and they talk about like 100 feet. So there are technologies that are a lot better than what is currently in place. Not that we want to spend $5 million on lights at this point, but we can deal with it. So when you talk about
Did they offer you a
portables-
discount at least?
So when you talk about portables, that's an interesting thought, because in some of this, we're going to be talking about days or a week, perhaps, of the season going into the fall. So.
Right. I appreciate those comments, and I also have heard the exact same thing, that the new technology is so much better that if we do have to add lights somewhere, we can do it in a much friendlier way to the neighborhood than in the past. So that's good.
Okay.
I will say, Christoph, they did offer me a soccer ball. It was a stress ball, so I have that.
Good comeback. Kristen?
And I just wanted to say one last thing too about, and this is probably more addressing the parents and their concerns, and just to let the parents know. I recall when my oldest was making, which was probably the last large switch that we have done in the schools, of making sixth grade move from elementary school to middle schools. And my kiddo was one of the first, well, it was the first class to move, and there was much hand-wringing and much concern from parents, and we would get together and talk, and is this going to be okay? Are our kids going to survive? Is it going to be all right? And it was wonderful, and that was because you did take the time to go through and find all of the issues, and it did take some time for sure to get everything going, but it was I think a fairly smooth process that first year, and certainly by the time my second one went through, it was a wonderful process. And so to the parents who are concerned out there, I hear you, but it's going to be good. It's going to be okay. I really do believe that, and so thank you.
Okay, board members, any final comments, questions? All right, well, thank you for your comments to kick this off, and for allowing the board to go through a lot of the questions and concerns that have been brought up by the community as well.